We've got to get to that breaking news just into us now. Police are on the scene of a school shooting in Northern California. At least 2 students, we understand, have been taken to the hospital. I want to get right to Morgan Chesky with what else we know right now. Morgan, fill us in.
Yeah, Hallie, we've just received an update from the Butte County Sheriff. This was taking place in the small community of Palermo. That's about an hour 15 north of Sacramento. As details stand right now, 2 students were wounded in this school shooting, but authorities are stressing at this point the gunman responsible is dead, believed to have been killed by a self-inflicted gunshot. We do know that school remains on lockdown at this point in time. And Hallie, this was a very small school, about 35 students in total, ranging from kindergarten through 8th grade. Those gunshots initially reported around 1 o'clock today. Authorities did respond. We do not know to what extent they engaged the gunman, but they say while that school remains on lockdown, there is no danger at this point in time. Of those 2 students wounded, at least one of them was airlifted from the scene, but the extent of their injuries are unknown at this time. Again, this remains an incredibly active investigation.
Turn to the shooting at a religious school in Northern California. A gunman opened fire, critically injuring 2 young students before killing himself. Melissa Adan is on the scene in Oroville, California. Good morning, Melissa.
George, this morning, 2 boys in kindergarten are hospitalized suffering from gunshot wounds. This after a shooter opened fire right here inside their school.
A Northern California community searching for answers this morning after a gunman opened fire at an elementary school in Butte County.
Shots fired.
Officials say 2 male students ages 5 and 6 were shot and wounded.
Those 2 children were transported to local hospitals. They are currently in extremely critical condition.
The suspect dead from a self-inflicted gunshot. Investigators working into the night collecting evidence. Authorities say earlier that day the shooter had met with the principal at Feather River Seventh-day Adventist School to discuss enrolling a student. Several minutes later, screams and shots were heard. The small Christian school about an hour north of Sacramento put on lockdown. The children taken to a nearby church to reunite with their families.
Tears, it was pandemonium. It's collective trauma.
The FBI and local police are now investigating the motive behind the shooting, including a belief that the suspect targeted this school due to its affiliation to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Robin.
All right, Melissa, our thanks to you.
Estamos aquí. We're right here, right across the border from Arizona, Nogales, Sonora, Mexico, at a local shelter. Here, mostly women and children. Was there to be a massive deportation? It will be places like this that may or may not be ready to receive hundreds of migrants. Bienvenidos. Welcome to Casa Misericordia. How many people can you take here? ¿Cuántas personas?
Nosotros tenemos ahorita 125 personas.
So you have 125 now? Lika runs this shelter. During the pandemic, she says, Casa Misericordia stayed open, taking at a time more than 300 people. It's lunchtime, and families at the shelter are lining up for a meal. They ask to protect their identity, fearful, they say, to be tracked down by those they're running away from.
Most of them is because violence against narco traffic.
Ismael helps migrants with the asylum process, and he says through this shelter, many have been able to find a safe haven. Each one of these pens in the U.S. map represents a family. All of them, at one point or another, stay here in this shelter. More than 2,500 people that came across the border and now in the U.S. How do they go across?
Well, 80% of the people who we provide services in the shelter already stay in the United States with a seek asylum in the United States.
These 2 women now in the shelter have pending applications and have been waiting for up to 12 months. Both of you are 21, single moms. You're both staying here. What's the situation?
Inseguridad.
Inseguridad. You're not secure out there. ¿Se sienten mejor aquí?
Sí.
¿Y por qué estás tú aquí? Why are you here?
Yo porque me siguen personas que mataron a mi papá y a mi abuela.
So people that kill your family, your grandfather, your grandmother, they're following you, so you're here hiding? ¿Estás aquí escondida?
Sí.
And now the women explain they also fear the possibility Applications for asylum could be terminated with President Trump's promise of mass deportation. However, seeking asylum is a human right and the law internationally and in the U.S. and cannot be entirely eliminated by one person. No matter what, though, these women say they will find a way across the U.S.-Mexico border for the sake of their children. En Nogales, Sonora, Mexico, Patricio Espinosa.
South Koreans continue to take it to the streets, denouncing their country's president and calling for his removal. This comes in the aftermath of that president declaring martial law in the country on Monday, and he justified the measure by accusing opposition parties of, quote, anti-state activities and colluding with North Korea. But in the face of the resistance from the National Assembly and demonstrators, he revoked that declaration just hours later. Tonight, his figures hangs in the balance, and the country's National Assembly has put forward a motion to impeach the president. A vote is set to take place at the end of the week. And one expert explains why the president's attempt to impose martial law collapsed so quickly.
What's different this time that martial law was declared is that it was done so immaturely. President Yoon did not have the support of his cabinet. He did not have the support of his own party.
The U.S. has vested interest in stability in South Korea. 28,000 American troops are stationed in the country, in part to deter North Korea.
A CBS News investigation found dozens of law enforcement leaders buying and illegally selling guns. A review of government audits and court records over the last 20 years uncovered instances in 23 states across the U.S., plus Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., for a total of more than 50 cases. And people who were supposed to protect and serve were selling these high-powered guns and making a steep profit. Erin Couchie, who led this reporting, is here with me in Studio 57. She's a producer for a CBS News Crime and Public Safety Unit. Erin, this is so mind-boggling that these high-ranking officers are getting these guns and then they're selling them to criminals. In essence, the law enforcement officers are criminals themselves.
Right. So the key is that these weapons are usually deemed too dangerous to be on the street. So they're using their access as law enforcement officials to gain access to things that otherwise wouldn't be on the market. They're saying we need this for our official duties to serve and protect, but actually they're secretly turning around and they're selling.
They're buying them because they're law enforcement officials, or they're requesting them? Tell me more.
It runs the gamut. So there were 50 cases all across the country, and there were different ways they got it. Sometimes they stole it out of the inventory. Sometimes they were their issued weapons by the department. In the most egregious cases, there were battlefield weapons, and that requires them to go to federal regulators, ask for special permission to gain access to them. And just to give you a sense of what kind of weapons these could take out an armored tank. They could go through a building at the other side, hit a target 18 football fields away. They can take out a military helicopter. That's an example from a real case. We found an Iowa police chief in a 3-person police department. Town was the population of less than 800, and he had requested over the course of 4 years 90 machine guns to get access to. He'd gotten approval. It took until he requested a Gatling-style machine gun that spewed 6,000 rounds a minute for federal regulators to say there's something fishy going on and starting to look into it. He's now serving a 5-year prison sentence, but he's totally unremorseful about it. He just says it's a business. It's not illegal to sell things in this country, and he's appealing his sentence because he just doesn't think it's a crime.
Oh, this is a lot to take in, Erin. And when I'm looking through all of this material, I'm seeing here that your team also uncovered social media posts where the buyers are talking about how they got the officers to sell weapons. Tell me more about that.
So when you're talking about machine guns, you do have to go to the federal regulation because there's been an outright ban in the United States since 1986. No one can have access to them. The one exception is official government use. So they go to federal regulators, but all you need is a letter. It's functionally a permission slip. A police chief signs a letter saying, I need this for department use. So there's literally do-it-yourself videos on social media explaining there's online web forums, and it just comes down to relationships. There's some guys who said, I know a police chief, I know a sheriff, I know a SWAT guy. They just take turns signing these letters for me, and they make it like it's all for fun. Some of these guys just think it's fun to literally mount it on an armored tank and just shoot it off into a field. And a lot of the guys is totally innocent, and that's what they do. But the problem is there are cases where they've ended up in the hands of criminals. So they've ended up with drug traffickers. They've ended up with arms dealers. There was a case where a police chief, a mayor, and a town. It was a member of the town council were trafficking guns and tactical gear to a Mexican cartel. There was a case just last year where they all ended up pleading guilty. It was 2 police chiefs, a sheriff, a Delta Force veteran, all conspiring together with a sanctioned Russian arms dealer, and they ended up in the hands of an international gun trafficker. Again, all of that ended up pleading guilty, so we know for sure that they were doing that. And then there was a case in the Northeast where it ended up being used in a fatal gang shooting of a 14-year-old boy who was just standing at a high school football game and accidentally got shot. So most of the cases don't end up in those egregious situations, but they certainly have and do, and these are law enforcement officials.
And arguably, that's the whole reason why they're supposed to have these permission slips, because once they get out into the public, then they're uncontrolled, and then you don't know where they're going to go next. But I'm also seeing here that there's some former ATF agents that you spoke with that said that they were reluctant, actually, to charge these officers who sold the weapons. What's going on with that?
So we spoke to about 6 agents who were the lead investigators on some of these cases, and the officers themselves were the ones that, or sorry, rather the federal agents were the ones who were actually really frustrated with this. They wanted to bring these cases, but they each had an anecdote about how they'd had to go to the department they had caught doing this, who had been doing it repeatedly, almost like as a course of business, that they were getting these guns just for the express purpose of selling them, even though they were supposed to be their department weapons. And they just had to say, I'm letting you off with a warning. Prosecutors were generally reluctant to try these cases, according to them.
So it's the prosecutors, not the ATF.
It's a little bit of both. So they say the prosecutors don't really want to do it because the sentences are very light. Most of these cases, people make plea deals. They serve less than a year, just a few months in jail. But we got an ATF memo from a few years ago that described this as a growing trend. That was in 2017. And most of the cases we found actually have happened since then. So it seems to be, it's hard to tell if it's happening more often or they're actually just going after it a little bit more now. But the memo said, it's our job to educate, not investigate. And I actually tracked down the senior agent who had written that memo, and he said, we generally take the posture, we don't question our law enforcement partners. So our partners, we're just going to give them the benefit of the doubt, and it's really only in the very, very egregious cases that we actually pursue. So when they've gotten many, many warnings, when we've traced them directly to a crime, and that's when you start to see charges. So the more than 50 cases, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more out there that all these agents are saying, oh yeah, I said, how do I look that up in the court docket? You're not going to see anything.
Fascinating reporting. Erin Couchie, thank you.
Die Bundesaußenministerin hat eine entsprechende Aussage gar nicht getätigt, sondern sie ist gefragt worden, was eigentlich dann sein würde in einer späteren Friedensphase. Und eigentlich hat sie nur versucht, weder Ja noch Nein zu sagen, wenn ich das mal sagen darf, weil das auch ganz unangemessen ist, jetzt darüber zu spekulieren, was später mal bei einem verhandelten Waffenstillstand und einer friedlichen Situation existiert. Ich nutze aber die Gelegenheit und durchaus im Einvernehmen mit der Bundesaußenministerin zu sagen, ich halte es für ausgeschlossen, dass wir in der gegenwärtigen Situation Truppen oder deutsche Soldaten in die Ukraine schicken. Das habe ich immer klargestellt und dabei bleibt's.